Hi everyone. This is the final set of lecture slides for Module 8 regarding marriages and intimate relationships. At this point, we've had a chance to talk about what is marital success, and we have also identified factors that are correlated with marital success. So in this set of slides, we're going to be looking at various marriage typologies. We're really going to focus in on Gottman's marriage typologies and specifically his functional marriage types. As the book points out, there was an earlier typology that received quite a bit of attention, Fitzpatrick's marriage typology. She looks at traditionals, independents, and separates. So I encourage you to take a look at that in your textbook. It's on page 149. Kind of familiarize yourself with that typology. But we're going to focus on Gottman's typology more in this set of slides. His typology is more recent. It kind of builds upon Fitzpatrick's original typology, and it really has, at least recently, received kind of more attention or is a more commonly used typology. Okay, so let's kind of jump into that. Okay, so let's take a look at Gottman's couples types. You can find a similar chart to this in your textbook on page 148, but there are a couple of differences that I wanted to point out. On my chart, you can see that I've listed 5 different couple types. In the book, they really only refer to 3 types, the 3 types that I have asterisks by. These types are referred to as functional couple types. So Gottman would argue the volatile couples, the validating couples, and the conflict avoidant couples are all functional. Individuals in this type of relationship all report being satisfied. The marriage works. On the other hand, the 2 couple types that I have listed in my chart without the asterisks at the bottom, Gottman would refer to these as dysfunctional couple types. Your book really doesn't mention these couple types, so I wanted to take a few minutes to still call your attention to that. But again, these couple types are romantic relationships where the individuals report not being satisfied in their romantic relationship. So I want to take just a closer look at each one of these couples. When it comes to the functional couples, Gottman argues that all 3 couple types are functional. In other words, it's not that one of these couple types is better necessarily than another. There just are some unique differences and important nuances. When we look at volatile couples, we can define these couples as very emotionally expressive. And really that comes with both positive and to some degree negative emotions. People in volatile couples are really not afraid to share their emotions. They really prioritize openness and honesty. Okay? So they can really maybe get into significant conflicts. They can argue passionately, but they also really try to maintain a lot of positive emotion and romance and goodwill towards each other. In some ways, I do think of these couples as a little bit like being on a roller coaster. That may be kind of dramatic because that implies some real negativity, but these couples do tend to experience really high highs, but then they also may have low lows. However, even with that being said, volatile couples still tend to have good boundaries. So even if they are willing to engage in pretty significant disagreements, they still are able to kind of set up boundaries where there's kind of like a, an implied line that doesn't get crossed, right? So it's not like they're just cutthroat and they're going to try and, win a conflict at all costs to be able to get their point of view across. They still have boundaries. They still have an appreciation for their partner and respect for their partner. Just to share kind of a personal example, my sister and her husband, I would describe as a volatile couple. In some cases, they are extremely warm and romantic, and I would say they kind of love each other passionately. Now, on the other hand, they do know how to fight. They sure know how to have conflict. But I forget how it even came up, but years ago I learned that they actually have this kind of number, or I guess it's kind of code word that they use when things start to get, when a conflict starts to get too heated. right? And they have kind of a really interesting story about how this the significance of the number, the kind of the word that they chose. But basically, they do a lot of joking around. Like I said, they also do they engage in plenty of conflict. But they kind of agreed when the joking around starts to not feel funny to one of them, or the conflict starts to feel not safe anymore, then they kind of have this code word, and they'll say that, and they'll kind of take a deep breath, and it's kind of their way of saying like, okay, wait a minute, here's a boundary that we don't want to cross. So I think that definitely is really illustrative of a tactic that volatile couples might engage in. All right, let's move next to the validating couples. Okay, validating couples are much more cautious with their emotional expression than the volatile couples. So they still, will express disagreements. They still engage in conflict. However, they really view themselves as a team. They have a real solidarity and a real way of prioritizing, companionship and friendship and just really togetherness within a relationship. So, if we think back to some of the things we've talked about already in this class regarding conflict and conflict management strategies, these couples really do tend to be good at soft startups. So again, it's not to say that they don't bring up conflict, but when they do, they are able to do so in a way that is not accusatory and demanding, but instead is kind of that soft startup, which we've discussed tends to be pretty effective and tends to lead to a positive outcome with the conflict. And so you can see there's some similarity, but also some real distinct differences between the validating couples and the volatile couples. Finally, we have the conflict avoidant couples. Sometimes I think this typology gets a little bit of a bad rap, and people assume that these couples, avoid conflict, even though maybe they need to engage in it sometimes. Gottman really says, that's a that's inaccurate. And maybe he should have renamed his couple type. Maybe it's a problem with the label that he's used. But really, these couples, it's not that they don't ever have conflict, although they are less emotionally expressive than the other two types. But instead, it's that they really try to focus on similarities between within the partnership, right? So they really try to find commonality, and so sometimes it may be the case that it's not that they're avoiding a conflict, but it's that the one partner is so empathetic or so engaged in perspective taking that they, for that reason, then may not perceive the conflict or not engage in the conflict. They also tend to be pretty accepting of each other, right? When you're in conflict avoidant couples, they tend to be really good at not trying to change each other or change their partners. Gottman does point out that it tends to be easier when both individuals in the couple kind of have the same perspective. On the other hand, when spouses kind of come from two different types, he refers to those couples as a mismatch. And he does kind of suggest that this type of relationship is trickier when there is a mismatch. It requires just some more flexibility and some more adjustment to kind of make the marriage work. But at the same time, he does not necessarily suggest that it's a deal breaker, right? That it's something that couples can't overcome. Okay, but like I said, those are three functional types of couples. The bottom two couples, hostile and hostile detached, are couple types that are not functional. They are couple types that either leave the individuals really unsatisfied in their relationship, or they are couple types that simply aren't sustainable, right? And that lead to the relationship ending or divorce. So you can see hostile couples, if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say hostile couples simply are defined by anger, right? Individuals in this couple have gotten to a place where they are simply angry at each other. So these couples involve partners that just are kind of sick of it. They're kind of over it. They don't hold back. They don't have boundaries or sensitivity to their partner. They engage in attacking each other. And based on previous lectures, we know that might look like criticism or contempt. And they engage in the other four horsemen behaviors as well, right? Defensiveness and stonewalling. So it's not good. Hostile detached. If I had to really sum this couple type up in one word, rather than using the word angry, I think I would just use the word cold. Hostile detached couples involve individuals that are simply just cold to each other. They're not sensitive or empathetic or nurturing. There's not a nurturing of admiration or a fondness of each other. Instead, these couples interact often in a way to kind of I have stab at each other, right? In order to kind of play this gotcha game, it's attack kind of game, and then it blows up, and flooding occurs, to use some previous course terminology, and then the couple kind of detaches, right? They separate, they kind of do their own thing, they're independent, and then perhaps some issue comes up that's unavoidable that leads to another kind of blow up, right? And they're kind of hopped on that vicious cycle. This couple type, you can, as I said earlier, you're not surprised to hear that it is really not typically a sustainable model, and that it is very strongly correlated with divorce down the road. Okay, so those are Gottman's couples types. Again, I encourage you to also take a look at Fitzpatrick's types, and you'll see, I think when you do, how there's definitely a lot of a similarity between the two examples. All right, but one other way I want to look at couple types is to make a few comparisons between heterosexual marriages and same-sex marriages. And my title for this slide is a little bit long, but I think it's really important. It's an important takeaway, and that is to say that there are simply more similarities between heterosexual and same-sex marriages than differences. But with that being said, the differences are important, and they are worth examining. Your book identifies a variety of different similarities and differences, but I also have posted in this slide a link to a really recent New York Times article that makes some really interesting comparisons, and they really, in this article, come to the conclusion that gay couples actually tend to be generally better at managing conflict and respectfully arguing with each other. And your book offers some of the same conclusions and provides some really interesting insight to that as well. Just a couple of things to think about. One explanation for why same-sex individuals in a same-sex relationship might be better at engaging in conflict might be, at least initially, an argument was that it might be the case that before same-sex marriage was legalized, partners in a same-sex relationship were not bound by the legal ties of marriage. So if an individual in that relationship no longer wanted to be in that relationship, they could get, I guess you could say, get out easier than in couples that were legally tied to one another, right? Another, I think, important thing to think about is the influence of gendered stereotypes on romantic relationships. A lot of data suggests that same-sex couples tend to have a lot more kind of meta communication about their relationship. They simply talk about their relationship a lot more than romantic relationships. I think one really good explanation for that is because we have so many gendered stereotypes in our culture. We have so many ideas about what is feminine work and what is masculine work that people in heterosexual relationships might just automatically assume females do certain jobs and males do other jobs, right? Because those jobs correspond with being more feminine or more masculine. Whereas individuals in same-sex relationships have conversations about how to divide the labor and how to, what kind of roles each person in the relationship fulfills. So I think that is an important difference between same-sex and heterosexual relationships to think about. One other key difference to think about is the amount of support the way in which support may differ for same-sex partners than for heterosexual partners. I think that our world is evolving and growing and changing, but it probably is still pretty safe to say that same-sex couples may not be receiving the same amount of support, kind of network support or societal support that heterosexuals heterosexual couples might be receiving. And we've already discussed how powerful and how influential and how important it can be that couples feel supported by their friends and their family and society as a whole. So it certainly, again, is worthwhile thinking about how differences in support for your romantic union might, in fact, actually influence your romantic partnership. Okay. All right. So I think I'll wrap things up at this point. Hopefully you've had a chance to listen to all 3 lectures regarding marriage and long-term romantic relationships. And yeah, thanks.